A single father lies unconscious on the polished floor of a 30-story corporate office, his mop clattering beside him. A 6-year-old girl kneels in his shadow, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks as she whispers into a phone, "Daddy won't wake up." Behind her, the CEO bursts through the glass doors, but the clock is already ticking. In a cardiac emergency, survival drops by 10% every single minute. This is Marcus. To the executives on the 20th floor, he's just the night janitor, a silent man who empties trash and wipes windows. But to the CEO's daughter, Chloe, he's the kind-faced man who always has a sticker in his pocket and lets her help clean her mother's desk after hours. Their secret routine was a solution to a childcare crisis, a bond built in empty offices. But tonight, that bond is the only thing that might save his life, because Marcus didn't just faint. Someone wanted him dead. Every night at 8 p.m., Marcus Thorne begins his shift in the gleaming silence of the Apex Corporation Tower. His world is one of chemical smells and the hum of floor buffers, a far cry from the life he left behind 7 years ago. Back then, he was Marcus Thorne, Pharm. D., a lead researcher for a rival biotech firm. He was the man who discovered a flaw in a blockbuster painkiller, a flaw that caused dangerous cardiac arrhythmias. He testified. The drug was pulled, and his career, along with his safety, evaporated. Now he mops floors. The change was drastic but necessary. A janitor's uniform became the perfect camouflage, a way to disappear in plain sight while he paid off the debts from his wife's long illness and raised his son, Leo, alone. The Apex building offered one unexpected grace: Chloe. Her mother, Evelyn Reed, the driven and often overwhelmed CEO, frequently worked past midnight. The official, exorbitantly priced corporate daycare closed at 7, so a quiet arrangement was born. Marcus would let Chloe stay in her mother's office, where she'd do her kindergarten worksheets, and he'd check on her between floors. He became her unofficial guardian of the empty hours, a secret kept from the board and the building's security logs. The night he collapsed began like any other. Chloe was coloring at the large glass desk in the executive suite. Marcus had just finished cleaning the adjacent laboratory wing on the 18th floor, a restricted area he accessed due to his thoroughness and trusted status. He'd noticed something odd earlier that evening, a broken seal on a cold storage unit labeled biosample disposal, and a faint, sweet odor he couldn't place. He logged it in the maintenance portal, a routine note. At 9:47 p.m., he returned to the executive floor to collect the recycling. He felt a sudden, profound dizziness, a metallic taste flooding his mouth. He saw Chloe look up, her crayon freezing midair. His last conscious thought wasn't of his own heart stuttering, but of her small, worried face. Then the world tilted, and the mop handle slipped from his grasp. Chloe did exactly what he taught her to do during their emergency games. She found the phone on her mother's desk, pressed the big green button he'd labeled, and spoke to the 911 operator with a terrifying clarity. "My friend Marcus fell down. He's not talking. He's on the floor by the pretty plants." She then called her mother's internal line, her voice a tiny tremor in the vast office. Evelyn Reed was in a tense video conference with Tokyo, a $50 million deal on the line. She heard her daughter's whispered terror and ran, heels echoing through the empty marble lobby, the deal dissolving behind her. The paramedics arrived in under 6 minutes. They found a 42-year-old male, unresponsive with a slow, irregular pulse. It didn't look like a standard cardiac event or a simple faint. One EMT, a veteran named Lewis, spotted pinpoint pupils and excessive sweating despite the cool air. He radioed in a possible toxic exposure. As they loaded Marcus onto the gurney, his janitorial keycard fell from his shirt pocket. It skittered across the floor, coming to rest at the foot of the laboratory wing's access door. Evelyn arrived in a whirlwind of panic, clutching Chloe. Her first overwhelming relief was that her daughter was safe. Her second sharp thought was for the quiet, kind man on the floor. She demanded answers. The lead paramedic was cautious. "Ma'am, this looks occupational. Was he working with any chemicals tonight?" Evelyn, the CEO, realized with a jolt that she had no idea. She didn't know what cleaners were used, what hazards existed in her own building. Her head of facilities was asleep. Security footage would take time. In that moment of helpless, furious ignorance, she looked at Marcus's pale face and made a decision. She wasn't just his employer. He had protected her child. She would move heaven and earth to protect him. At County General, Marcus was rushed into decontamination and then the ICU. The medical team was puzzled. Symptoms pointed to organophosphate poisoning, found in some industrial insecticides and notoriously in nerve agents. But this was a downtown office tower. While they pumped him full of atropine, the hospital's toxicology report was initiated. Meanwhile, in the waiting room, Evelyn tried to comfort a shell-shocked Chloe. The little girl, clutching a stuffed animal Marcus kept in his locker for her, looked up and said, "The bad smell man was in the lab before story time." Evelyn froze. "What bad smell man, sweetie?" "The man who isn't nice. He wears the white coat." He was angry at the cold box. A cold dread settled in Evelyn's stomach. She called her head of security, David Chen, and gave 2 orders. First, pull all access logs for the lab wing from that evening. Second, secure the entire 18th floor. No one in or out. Back in the ICU, Marcus's condition stabilized, but he remained in a coma. A police officer arrived to take a preliminary report, a possible industrial accident. But when the officer ran Marcus's ID through the database, his brow furrowed. The social security number matched, but the attached photo and profile were flagged with a cryptic, low-level federal marker. Witness security referred to USPIS. The United States Postal Inspection Service. That made no sense. It was a placeholder, a ghost in the system. The man lying in the bed was both Marcus Thorne, the janitor, and someone else entirely. David Chen called Evelyn at 3 a.m., his voice tight. "Evelyn, we have a problem. The access logs for the lab were deleted from the primary server at 9:55 p.m. We're trying to recover them from the backup, and there's more." He took a breath. "I reviewed earlier hallway footage. At 8:30 p.m., Marcus entered the lab. At 8:45, Dr. Aris Thorne, the lead director of our neurotoxin research division, entered. They overlapped for 12 minutes. The camera outside the cold storage room shows a confrontation. It looks like Marcus was trying to prevent Aris from removing something." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Dr. Aris Thorne was her star scientist, a genius she'd poached at great cost. His work on targeted neurological therapies was the cornerstone of Apex's next phase, and his name was Thorne, a coincidence she'd never questioned. She stared at the unconscious man in the hospital bed, the pieces crashing together in her mind. The researcher who vanished years ago after whistleblowing, the brilliant but ruthless scientist now on her payroll, a deleted log, a poisoned janitor. She leaned close to Marcus, her voice a low whisper. "What did you see in that lab?" At that moment, Marcus's heart monitor spiked. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. His hand twitched as if trying to grasp something. On his fingertip, the ICU nurse would later note, was a nearly invisible smear of a peculiar blue powder. The blue powder on Marcus Thorne's finger was the first physical clue in a labyrinth no one knew existed. It was collected by a wary nurse and handed to a police evidence technician, who almost logged it as standard building dust. But the hospital's head toxicologist, Dr. Anya Sharma, took one look under a microscope and called the CDC. The particles were a synthetic alkaloid derivative, engineered to be absorbed through the skin and attack the cardiac nervous system. It was a designer poison, and its presence turned the case from an accident into an attempted murder investigation. Evelyn Reed spent the dawn hours in a sterile hospital conference room with Detective Maria Rosti. Security footage from the Apex building played on a laptop. They watched the grainy black and white sequence from the lab wing, Marcus entering, Dr. Aris Thorne arriving later, their heated discussion near the cold storage unit. The body language was clear. Marcus was blocking access. Aris, usually a picture of cold control, was visibly agitated. Then, a critical moment. Aris reached into his lab coat pocket. Marcus flinched back, raising a hand. The powder, invisible on the feed, must have been deployed then. They know each other, Rosti stated, pausing the video. This isn't a random janitor interrupting a theft. This is personal. Evelyn could only nod, her mind racing. She authorized Rosti to pull full personnel files on both men. What came back an hour later was a seismic shock. Marcus Thorne, former pharmaceutical researcher, held a doctorate in neuropharmacology. His whistleblower case 7 years prior had involved a drug called Cardioflex, manufactured by Vedex Pharma. The lead developer on Cardioflex, a young, ambitious researcher named Aris Thorne. They weren't just acquaintances, they were brothers. Evelyn stared at the two headshots side by side on the screen. Marcus with tired, kind eyes, Aris with a sharp, calculating gaze. The family resemblance once pointed out was unmistakable. The file detailed a bitter schism. Marcus had discovered the fatal flaw in their joint project. Aris had argued to bury the data, to reformulate in secret. Marcus had gone to the regulators. The drug was scrapped. Vedex Pharma paid billions in settlements, and Aris's reputation was permanently scarred. Marcus, hailed as a hero by the public, became a pariah in the industry, facing blacklisting and silent threats that eventually drove him into hiding. Aris vanished into the high-stakes world of private biotech research, his ambition curdling into a ruthless desire for redemption and revenge. "He's been working for me for 3 years," Evelyn whispered, horror dawning. "He knew Marcus was here. He must have known the whole time." This wasn't a chance encounter. It was a predator finding its prey in a new cage. The lab confrontation wasn't about stopping a theft. It was a final, violent settlement of an old debt. Detective Rosti moved fast. She secured a warrant for Dr. Aris Thorne's lab, his home, and his financials. Meanwhile, Evelyn, operating on a parallel track, used her CEO authority for a full audit of the neurotoxin research division. What she discovered was a second layer of deception. The project, officially titled Project Synapse, was billed as research into targeted neural repair for stroke victims. But the budgetary allocations were staggering, and the security protocols were far beyond standard biomedical research. There were line items for advanced airborne dispersion testing and contracts with a defense logistics subcontractor. Confrontation was inevitable. Evelyn cornered Aris in his pristine office at 10 a.m. He was calm, sipping espresso, as if the night's events were a minor inconvenience. "Evelyn, a tragic accident with the janitorial staff. I've already instructed my team to review all chemical protocols." "He's not just janitorial staff, Aris. He's Marcus. He's your brother." Aris's porcelain cup hit the saucer with a sharp *clink*. The facade cracked for a fraction of a second, revealing a well of pure, icy hatred. Then it was gone, smoothed over. "I have no brother. That man betrayed his family and his profession. His current situation is karma." "The police have the footage from the lab. They have a sample of the toxin you used on him." This time the calm shattered. Aris stood up, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. That toxin is the key to the most advanced neurological targeting platform in history. My life's work. He was trying to sabotage it again, to steal it for God knows who. I was protecting intellectual property worth more than this entire company." Evelyn didn't blink. "You deleted the access logs. You poisoned an employee in my building. You used my resources, my trust, to settle a personal grudge." She slid a printout of the budget anomalies across his desk. "And you've been lying about what Project Synapse really is. Who are you building it for, Aris?" He looked at the paper, then back at her, a smug, terrifying smile touching his lips. "For the highest bidder, Evelyn, the applications are limitless. Imagine a compound that can disable a single individual in a crowd with no collateral damage, or one that can induce temporary paralysis in a security detail. The defense contractors call it a surgical strike in a vial. My brother's pathetic moralizing almost destroyed one breakthrough. I wasn't going to let him destroy this one." The admission hung in the air. Evelyn realized the stakes had just exploded beyond a family feud. Aris wasn't just a vengeful brother, he was a merchant of weaponized science operating inside her company. As security personnel, summoned by Evelyn's discreet alert, entered the office to escort Aris out, he leaned close. "He'll never wake up, you know. The variant I used induces a persistent vegetative state, a living tomb, quite poetic for a man who loved to play the conscious hero." While Aris was detained for questioning, Detective Rosty's team executed the search warrant on his lab. Behind a false panel in the cold storage room, they found a secondary fingerprint-locked unit. Inside were not research samples but ready-to-ship vials of a crystalline blue substance, along with deployment mechanisms, small pressurized spray devices disguised as pens. The lab's true work was not healing, it was weaponization. The news began to leak. By midday, local reporters caught wind of a major biotoxin scare at the Apex Tower. The story framed Marcus as a heroic janitor exposed to a dangerous chemical leak, a narrative Evelyn's PR team desperately pushed to contain the wider truth. But the whispers were already circulating on financial news channels. Apex Corp stock began a slow, sickening slide. The personal stakes skyrocketed that afternoon. Marcus's son, Leo, a quiet 15-year-old, was pulled from school by a family friend after seeing the news. He arrived at the hospital, a storm of fear and confusion. Seeing his father motionless in the ICU, surrounded by machines, broke him. He turned to Evelyn, his voice trembling with anger too big for his frame. He was safe here. He cleaned floors. Why would anyone want to hurt him? Evelyn had no answer that could comfort him. The guilt was crushing. She had provided the hunting ground. Then the pivot. While reviewing the seized research data with a federal hazardous materials expert, Detective Rosty found a buried file. It was a private, encrypted log written by Aris. In it, he ranted about Marcus, but also detailed a compliance test performed 3 weeks earlier. The subject was listed only as Asset K. The log noted the subject experienced rapid onset syncope and respiratory depression, but recovered after 24 hours with the administered antidote. There was asterisk and antidote. Aris had lied. Marcus wasn't in an irreversible coma. He was in a medically induced paralysis, a state that could theoretically be reversed. But the antidote formula was not in the lab. Aris, in custody and now lawyered up with a high-powered attorney from a firm known for defending rogue scientists, was silent. He knew it was his last piece of leverage. The medical team was flying blind, treating symptoms without the key to unlock the root cause. The pressure on Evelyn became multi-directional. Her board was in panic, demanding she quarantine the story. Federal agencies, including the FBI's Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate, were now opening inquiries, threatening to shut down her entire research division. Her daughter Chloe was having night terrors, crying for Marcus, and a young boy's father was dying by inches in a hospital bed because of a war that had followed him into the one place he thought was safe. In a moment of desperation, Evelyn did the only thing she could think of. She went back to the source. Sitting beside Marcus's bed with Leo on the other side holding his father's hand, she spoke to him as if he could hear. "Marcus, I am so sorry. I didn't know, but I need you to fight. Chloe needs you. Leo needs you. Help me find the antidote. What did you see? What did he take from that cold storage unit?" For hours, nothing. Then, as evening faded into night, Leo, exhausted, fell asleep in his chair. Evelyn was about to leave when she saw it. A single tear tracked from the corner of Marcus's closed eye down his temple. On the heart monitor, the rhythm, which had been a steady, artificial flatline from the packing drugs, sputtered. A series of erratic spikes. His index finger, the one that had held the blue powder, twitched once, twice, then tapped a slow, deliberate sequence against the bedsheet. Tap. Tap, tap, tap. It was a pattern, a code. Evelyn's breath caught. She didn't understand it, but it was a signal. A sign that Marcus Thorne, the researcher, the fighter, was still in there, trapped behind the poison's veil, trying to communicate. The man they had written off was beginning to wake up, and the secrets he held about what his brother had really built in that lab were the only things that could save him, and potentially countless others. But as Evelyn rushed to find a nurse, her phone buzzed with a text from her security head, David Chen. The message was 3 words that turned her blood to ice: "Leo is gone." The hospital room, a moment before filled with the fragile hope of a tapping finger, turned into a vortex of fresh terror. Leo was gone, not wandered off, vanished. The security footage from the hospital's family lounge showed a figure in orderly scrubs approaching the tired teenager, saying a few words, and Leo, his face pale but nodding, following him out a service exit. The orderly never looked at the camera. He knew where they were. Evelyn's world fractured. This was no longer corporate espionage or a poisoned employee. This was the kidnapping of a child. Detective Rosty's entire focus shifted. The hunt for the antidote was now a race against a human clock. Aris Thorne in his interrogation room smiled thinly when informed. "A guarantee," he said simply, "to ensure my brother's continued silence and my own release. Harm me and the boy dies. Keep me and Marcus never wakes up. The formula for the antidote is my insurance policy." But Evelyn refused to be paralyzed. While the police launched an Amber Alert and traced the fake orderly's route, she returned to Marcus's bedside with a new urgency: the tapping sequence. She recorded it on her phone: tap, 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 tap. She played it for David Chen, her security head, a former military signals analyst. He listened, frowning. "It's not Morse code, too simple. It's a numerical pattern: 1, 1, 2, 1. He mapped it out: 1, 12, 1. Could be a date. January 12, 2001. A locker combination." Then Evelyn remembered Marcus's old life, his research. "It's a chemical reference," she breathed. "The first group on the periodic table, hydrogen, then group 12, zinc, then hydrogen again, HZN, HHZNH. It wasn't a complete formula, it was a clue to a location, a safe, a storage unit." She called Leo's phone, which went straight to voicemail. But as it rang, she remembered Marcus's old habit, one Chloe had mentioned. He kept a treasure box of his past life in his locker at work, things he didn't want Leo to find and ask about. They raced back to the Apex building. In Marcus's modest staff locker behind his spare uniform was a small, fireproof safe. The combination lock was a letter dial, not numbers. HZNH. The lock clicked open. Inside were no vials or formulas. Instead, there was a faded photograph of Marcus and Aris in their lab coats years ago, a tarnished silver medal for academic excellence, and a single, encrypted USB drive. David Chen plugged it into an isolated laptop. The drive required a password. Evelyn tried everything: Marcus's birthday, Leo's birthday, Sarah's name. Nothing. In desperation, she typed in the word Chloe had said Marcus used for their secret after-hours game: sticker. The drive unlocked. The files were a digital time bomb. Marcus, it turned out, had never stopped being a researcher. For the past 6 months, since he first recognized his brother's name on the Apex directory, he had been conducting his own covert audit. Using his janitorial access to collect discarded lab printouts, photograph whiteboards after hours, and even sample residue from vents, he had built a damning dossier. Project Synapse was far more advanced than even Aris had boasted. Human trials had already been conducted off the books using homeless populations from the city's periphery, listed in the files as volunteer efficacy assessments. The results were horrifying: prolonged neural disruption, permanent motor skill damage in some subjects. And the buyer wasn't just a vague defense contractor. The communications, buried in encrypted accounting files, pointed to a shell corporation ultimately owned by a private military group with ties to a sanctioned foreign regime. Marcus hadn't been trying to steal the research. He'd been building a case to destroy it. The confrontation in the lab happened because Aris had discovered Marcus's snooping and was attempting to remove the final batch of the toxin and all related data before a scheduled handoff. The poison was both a punishment and a way to permanently silence the only man who knew the full, ugly truth. As Evelyn and David scrolled through the evidence, a new email popped up on a monitored dummy account Aris had used. It was from the buyer, impatient. The message read: "Delivery delay unacceptable. Asset acquisition alternative confirmed. Proceed with original terms for primary package or we reclaim all materials. The asset acquisition alternative could only mean one thing. They had taken Leo to force the release of both Aris and the toxin. The police, now working with the FBI, traced the fake orderly's vehicle to an abandoned warehouse on the industrial docks. It was a dead end, a clean drop point with no forensic traces. But the FBI's tech team, analyzing the encrypted drive, found a hidden partition. It contained a single audio file, dated the night Marcus was poisoned. Evelyn pressed play. It was Marcus's voice, shaky but clear, recorded on his phone just before the confrontation. "If you're hearing this, I didn't make it," Aris found out. "The compound is called Neurolock. Antidote is based on a modified cholinesterase reactivator, but the synthesis pathway is unique. The key is in the chiral center of the molecule. He's hidden the finalized formula. He always uses our mother's maiden name reversed as a cipher key. The delivery is set for the gala, the charity gala at the Apex Tower. They're using the champagne delivery as cover. Don't let it get out. And please, protect Leo." The recording ended. The gala, the Apex Foundation's annual charity event, was scheduled for tomorrow night. 500 of the city's elite would be in the building, including foreign diplomats and dignitaries. It was the perfect cover for an exchange. And now Evelyn understood the true, horrific scale. The primary package wasn't just a few vials. The communications hinted at a dispersal device, something that could be integrated into the building's climate control system for a demonstration of power. They weren't just selling a weapon, they were planning a live, covert test. Evelyn had a choice: hand everything to the FBI and let a full tactical squad storm her building during a high-profile event, risking panic, Leo's life, and potentially triggering the dispersal, or use her insider knowledge to control the play. She looked at David Chen. "We're going to the gala. We're going to get Leo back, and we're going to burn this whole thing to the ground." With the FBI's reluctant, covert backing, a plan was formed. Evelyn would proceed as the hostess. David and a small, trusted team would infiltrate the service areas. Their goal: intercept the exchange, secure the antidote formula, and rescue Leo. The ticking clock was now measured in hours. The night of the gala arrived. The tower glittered, a beacon of wealth and normalcy. Evelyn smiled, shook hands, her stomach a knot of ice. Through a concealed earpiece, she heard David's updates. "Service elevator control is ours. I see the catering truck with the champagne crates. It's here." From her vantage point on the mezzanine, Evelyn watched as a team of uniformed staff unloaded sealed crates marked Vintage Reserve. One man, moving with a military precision that betrayed him, supervised. This was the buyer's operative. And then her heart stopped. Across the crowded lobby, being guided by a woman in a staff uniform, was Leo. He looked dazed but unharmed. He was being moved toward the service corridor. The exchange was happening now. David's voice crackled. "We have visual on Leo. The package is in crate 7. They're heading to the loading dock for the swap. We move in 30 seconds. But then a new voice cut into the channel, calm and menacing. It was Aris Thorne's lawyer. "Ms. Reed, I believe you have something of my client. Call off your dogs or the boy receives a different injection, one without an antidote." They had compromised the comms. The lawyer was somewhere in the building, watching. The operative guiding Leo had stopped, his hand in his jacket. He was waiting for the order. Evelyn was out of moves. The entire plan was exposed. In that moment of suffocating stalemate, a new signal flashed on the building's internal security feed, which David was monitoring. In the ICU at County General, Marcus Thorne's heart monitor was no longer tapping a slow code. It was spiking erratically, then flatlining. A code blue had been called. The distraction was total, and it came from the last place anyone expected. The man in the coma had just made his final, desperate play. The code blue at County General wasn't a medical emergency. It was a signal. Marcus Thorne, fighting through a chemical prison, had deliberately triggered the alarm by biting his tongue, flooding his system with pain-induced adrenaline. It was the only move he had left. In the chaos of rushing nurses and crashing carts, the federal agent posted outside his door turned away for a critical 30 seconds. That was all the time Marcus needed. With a Herculean effort, he rolled sideways, his paralyzed arm flopping uselessly, and used his chin to press the nurse call button in a specific, rapid pattern. 3 quick presses. A pause. 2 presses. It was the same code he and Leo used on their doorbell to signal all clear when he got home from work. The alert wasn't for medical help. It was routed as a priority signal to David Chen's private phone, a failsafe Marcus had programmed weeks earlier when he first felt the net tightening. The message read, Gala, HVAC intake, antidote, mother's maiden name reversed, the location and the key. At the gala, David's compromised earpiece went silent as the FBI executed a comms blackout. He saw the new message flash on his secure phone. He didn't hesitate. He broke from his team and sprinted for the maintenance stairwell, heading for the building's central HVAC control room on the 20th floor. Meanwhile, Evelyn, seeing the operative's hand tense near Leo, made her own move. She walked directly to the lawyer who had threatened her, a man named Croft, and spoke loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Mr. Croft, your client Dr. Thorne just suffered a major coronary in custody. The FBI is with him now. You might want to take a call. It was a bluff, but a perfect one. Croft's smug certainty faltered. He stepped away to call his contacts, creating a split second of uncertainty for the operative guarding Leo. That split second was all David needed. He reached the HVAC room, overpowered a technician who was actually one of the buyer's men, and found the dispersal device. It was ingeniously integrated into the air handling unit, set to aerosolize the Neurolock compound and circulate it through the gala floor at the press of a button on a remote. The remote was in the operative's pocket, but the antidote formula was the key to everything. David pulled out his phone, accessed the encrypted drive, and input the cipher key. Marcus and Aris's mother's maiden name was Everly, reversed, YLREVE. The file unlocked, revealing not just the synthetic pathway for the antidote but its common name, Neurolite, and its chemical signature, a unique isotopic marker. David broadcast the signature over the secured FBI channel. The antidote has a tracer. Scan the crates. In the loading dock, FBI agents with handheld spectrometers swept the champagne crates. Crate 7 lit up. Inside, nestled among bottles, were vials of the crystalline blue Neurolock, and in a separate, lead-lined box, 5 vials of clear liquid labeled YLREVE. They had the antidote. With the formula known and the delivery intercepted, the operation collapsed. The buyer's operative, seeing his escape route blocked by plainclothes agents, made a desperate grab for Leo as a shield. But Leo, in a move that echoed his father's training, stomped hard on the man's instep and bolted toward Evelyn. The operative was swarmed and subdued. Leo crashed into Evelyn's arms, sobbing with relief. The gala was quietly evacuated under the pretext of a gas leak. The weapon was secured. The antidote was rushed to County General, but one man was already ahead of them. Aris Thorne, in his holding cell, had been monitoring everything through Croft until the lawyer was detained. He knew the game was over. His life's work was in federal evidence lockers. His buyers were compromised. His revenge had failed. When the agents came to transfer him to a high-security facility, he made one final request: to see his brother. They brought him in shackles to Marcus's ICU room. Marcus was conscious, the newly arrived antidote counteracting the poison's grip. He was weak, his voice a rasp, but his eyes were clear. The brothers stared at each other across a chasm of 7 years. "You ruined everything," Aris whispered, his defiance gone, leaving only hollow bitterness. "Twice." Marcus took a shallow breath. "No, Ari, you did. I just wouldn't let you bury the bodies." It was science, pure, beautiful science. It was murder, then and now. Marcus looked at his brother, not with hatred, but with profound sadness. "You were the brilliant one. You could have healed millions. You chose to terrorize a few for a paycheck from monsters. Why?" Aris looked away out the window at the city lights. Because after you spoke, no one would fund my genius. They gave the grants to hacks. This was the only way to prove I was right. He finally met Marcus's gaze. You took my future. I tried to take yours. It seems we're both failures. Marcus shook his head slowly. You're wrong. I have a son who's brave. I have friends and a little girl and a CEO who fought for a janitor. You have a legacy of poison and a prison cell. We are not the same. Aris had no retort. He was led away, his head bowed. The Thorne brothers' war was finally over. The aftermath was a tidal wave. Apex Corporation's stock plummeted, but Evelyn, testifying before Congress, turned the disaster into a reckoning. She exposed the loopholes that allowed weaponized research to hide behind corporate walls, championing new transparency in biotech laws. She sold the non-toxic remnants of the neuro-targeting research to a reputable university for genuine medical application, under strict oversight. The company survived, smaller, humbler, and ethically restructured. Marcus recovered fully, but he didn't return to the mop. With the whistleblower protections from his old case finally enforced, and a substantial financial settlement from Apex for the attack, he was free. He bought a small lab space, not for cutting-edge research, but for public advocacy. He founded the Clear Chem Initiative, a nonprofit that trains journalists and community watchdogs to understand scientific reports and spot the early warning signs of unethical research. He teaches, just as he once taught Chloe how to dial 911, but now his students are adults learning to protect their communities. Leo, inspired by his father's quiet courage and the FBI agents who saved him, is studying forensic science. He and his father have long, painful, healing talks about the past, about Sarah, about fear and principle. Their bond, forged in loss, was tempered in fire and emerged stronger. And every Tuesday after school, Chloe Reed comes to Marcus's small lab. She doesn't color on the floor anymore. She sits at a real desk and Marcus shows her harmless, fascinating experiments. How to extract DNA from a strawberry, how indicators work. He is, officially, her tutor. Evelyn pays him a generous rate, but the real payment is the light in her daughter's eyes and the peace in her own. The secret, stressful arrangement, born of a childcare gap, had blossomed into an open, chosen family. 1 year after the gala, Marcus stood in a conference room at the FBI's field office, teaching a class on biochemical threat indicators to agents. Afterward, the lead agent from the case handed him a small evidence box. We're closing the file. This is the personal effect recovered from the operative. We thought you should have it. Inside the box was Marcus's old black rubber bracelet, the one that had fallen off during his collapse. The words "never leave a fallen" were still visible. He thought it lost forever. He turned it over. On the inside, in tiny, faded letters he'd never noticed before, was an inscription from his wife Sarah, 4MY Hero. He hadn't worn it in a year, believing its message was about his past. Now he understood it was a promise for his future. He put it on. He drives home now in daylight to a quiet house where his son is doing homework. The shadows of the past are still there, but they no longer stretch over the present. Marcus Thorne, the researcher who became a janitor to hide, became a teacher to be seen. He stopped at an accident and in doing so, prevented a catastrophe. He proved that the most powerful weapon isn't a toxin in a vial, but a conscience that refuses to look away. And that sometimes, the person who saves the day isn't the one in the uniform, but the one holding the mop, with a sticker in his pocket for a little girl who was even his own. The story of Marcus Thorne forces us to look at the architecture of our own world differently. We walk through buildings cleaned by invisible hands, past people we've been trained not to see. We assume safety is guaranteed by systems, by protocols, by those in obvious uniforms. But what Marcus's story reveals is that the most critical line of defense in any crisis is often the individual closest to it. The person who notices the odd smell, who sees the broken seal, who doesn't walk away. His journey from a celebrated researcher to a ghost in a janitor's uniform wasn't just a fall from grace. It was a descent into a different kind of clarity. On the 20th floor, they saw a man pushing a mop. On the ground floor, a little girl saw a protector. That disconnect is where the real danger festered, and where the real heroism was finally revealed. The bond he formed with Chloe wasn't a sidebar to the plot. It was the central mechanism of the entire story. It was the human connection that bypassed all the corporate security, all the failed protocols, and triggered the chain of salvation. We live in an age of specialized heroes, of grand gestures captured on camera, but the statistics tell a quieter, more urgent truth. Janitors and cleaners suffer tens of thousands of serious injuries every year, often working with hazardous chemicals in isolation. Their vulnerability is a built-in feature of the modern workplace. Marcus's collapse was a dramatic version of a quiet, ongoing crisis, but his rescue was a blueprint for something better. It showed that safety isn't just a policy in a binder. It's a culture of noticing, of caring about the person in the next room, regardless of their title. Eris Thorne's poison was designed to be undetectable and untraceable, a perfect, silent weapon. It was defeated not by a bigger weapon, but by a child's love, a CEO's conscience, and a father's stubborn will to communicate from the edge of oblivion. The highest technology was defeated by the oldest human signals: a tap of a finger, a drawing in a pocket, a whispered plea into a phone. So the question this story leaves us with isn't about biotoxins or corporate espionage. It's more personal. Who are the invisible people in your orbit? What do they see that you don't? And what unseen battles are they fighting, armed with nothing but their attention and their conscience? Marcus Thorne's legacy isn't a scientific paper or a patent. It's a reminder that courage doesn't wear a uniform. It wears whatever it needs to wear to get the job done. It's the resolve to never leave a fallen comrade, even if that comrade is the person who empties your trash. Sometimes, the person who saves the day is the one we've spent a lifetime learning to overlook. Pay attention. Subscribe if you believe the greatest heroes are often the ones we never think to look for.